The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble courtyard of Valenhall Palace as Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial armor one final time. 20 years of loyal service to the Kingdom of Ethermore had led to this moment, his appointment as head of the Royal Guard. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like the heavy golden epaulets that marked his new rank. Princess Alara Brightwater, heir to the throne of Ethermore, was known throughout the kingdom for her sharp wit and fiercer temper. At 19, she possessed a beauty that could stop conversations in grand ballrooms, but also a stubborn streak that had driven 3 previous royal tutors to early retirement. Her auburn hair caught the morning light as she practiced sword work in the private training grounds, her movements precise and deadly despite her noble upbringing. The kingdom had been peaceful for nearly a decade under King Aldrich's rule, but whispers of unrest had begun to circulate through the castle corridors. The neighboring kingdom of Shadowmere, ruled by the ambitious Queen Morwen Blackthorn, had been expanding their military forces and testing the borders. Trade disputes had escalated into minor skirmishes, and diplomatic relations grew more strained with each passing month. Captain Thornfield's first official duty was to oversee the security arrangements for Princess Alara's upcoming engagement announcement. The ceremony would bring together nobles from across the continent, including representatives from Shadowmere. The political marriage had been arranged to secure peace between the kingdoms, but the princess had made her feelings about the arrangement abundantly clear to anyone within earshot of the castle. As Thornfield made his morning rounds, he noticed unusual activity in the servant quarters. Maids whispered in hushed tones and quickly dispersed when they saw him approaching. The head cook, usually cheerful and talkative, avoided eye contact and hurried past with uncharacteristic urgency. Something was amiss in the carefully ordered world of the palace, and every instinct honed through years of military service told him that danger was approaching. The first sign of real trouble came during the midday meal. Princess Alara had requested a private lunch in her chambers, claiming a headache, but Thornfield's network of loyal guards reported that she had been seen in animated conversation with her lady-in-waiting, Duchess Isabel Greymont. The Duchess, a woman of middle years with silver-streaked hair and intelligent gray eyes, had been the princess's confidant since childhood and was known to encourage her more rebellious tendencies. When Thornfield knocked on the princess's chamber door to inquire about her well-being, he was met with silence. The ornate wooden door, carved with the royal coat of arms, remained firmly closed. After several attempts to gain entry, he used his master key and discovered the room empty. The princess's afternoon gown lay across the bed, but her riding clothes were missing from the wardrobe. Panic began to set in as guards were dispatched to search the palace grounds. The stables confirmed Thornfield's worst fears. Princess Ilara's favorite horse, a spirited black mare named Midnight, was gone. The stable master, an elderly man with weathered hands and worried eyes, reported that the princess had left alone nearly 2 hours earlier, declining the escort that protocol demanded. The surrounding countryside of Ethermore was beautiful but treacherous, filled with dense forests where bandits were known to hide, and rocky terrain that could prove deadly to an inexperienced rider. Princess Alara, despite her many talents, had always been more comfortable with books and blade work than navigating the wild lands beyond the palace walls. As search parties were organized, a messenger arrived from the border outpost with disturbing news. A group of Shadowmere soldiers had been spotted moving through the neutral territory that separated the two kingdoms. Their intentions were unclear, but their presence so close to the capital city was deeply troubling. The timing of both events, the princess's disappearance and the enemy movement, seemed too coincidental to ignore. King Aldrich, a man in his 50s with graying temples and kind but weary eyes, summoned Thornfield to the throne room immediately. The great hall, with its soaring ceilings and stained glass windows depicting the kingdom's history, had witnessed countless important moments, but few as urgent as this. The king's usual calm demeanor cracked as he learned of his daughter's disappearance. The political implications were staggering. If Princess Alara had been captured by Shadowmere forces, it could provide Queen Morwen with the perfect excuse to demand territorial concessions or favorable trade agreements. Worse still, if the princess had chosen to run away rather than face her arranged marriage, the carefully negotiated peace treaty would crumble, potentially leading to open warfare between the kingdoms. Duchess Isabel was summoned for questioning. her usual composed manner showing cracks of genuine concern. She revealed that Princess Ilara had been receiving secret correspondence for several weeks, letters that arrived through unofficial channels and were carefully hidden from the royal censors. The content of these messages remained a mystery, as the princess had destroyed them after reading. The afternoon wore on with mounting tension, as search parties returned with no sign of the missing princess. Thornfield found himself caught between his duty to protect the royal family and his growing suspicion that this disappearance was part of a larger plot. The palace, usually bustling with activity, felt heavy with unspoken fears and whispered speculations. As evening approached and torches were lit throughout the castle, a lone rider appeared at the main gate. The figure, cloaked in dark fabric and riding a lathered horse, carried a message that would change everything. The letter, sealed with black wax and bearing an unfamiliar crest, contained a ransom demand that shocked even the most experienced members of the royal council. The message was brief but chilling. Princess Ilara was being held in a secure location, and her safe return depended on King Aldrich's willingness to cede control of the strategic mountain passes that controlled trade between the kingdoms. The deadline for compliance was set for 3 days hence, during what should have been the princess's engagement ceremony. Captain Thornfield studied the letter carefully, noting the quality of the parchment and the style of handwriting. His military training had taught him to look for details that others might miss, and several elements of the ransom note raised questions about its authenticity. The language was too formal for typical bandits, yet too crude for educated nobles. Someone was trying very hard to hide their true identity. As the castle prepared for what might be a long siege or a desperate rescue mission, Thornfield made a decision that would define his career and possibly determine the fate of 2 kingdoms. He would not wait for official orders or royal approval. The princess's life hung in the balance, and every hour of delay could prove fatal. The hunt for Princess Ilara would begin at first light, but the real question remained. Was she truly a captive, or was she playing a far more dangerous game than anyone realized? Dawn broke cold and gray over Valenhall Palace, as Captain Thornfield assembled his most trusted men in the armory. The smell of leather and steel filled the air as weapons were checked and supplies gathered for what could be a lengthy pursuit. Sergeant Willem Redstone, a grizzled veteran with scars mapping his campaigns across his weathered face, had volunteered to lead the tracking team despite having earned his retirement years ago. The search party consisted of 12 elite guards, each chosen for specific skills that might prove crucial in the days ahead. Among them was Corporal David Ashworth, barely 20 but already renowned for his tracking abilities, and Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood, whose knowledge of the local terrain was unmatched. They moved out as the morning mist still clung to the palace grounds, their horses' hooves echoing against the cobblestones. Princess Ilara's trail led them through the eastern gate and into the Whispering Woods, a dense forest that stretched for miles toward the contested border territories. The ancient trees, some as old as the kingdom itself, created a natural maze where sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. It was perfect terrain for an ambush, and Thornfield felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him with each mile they traveled. The first real clue came 3 hours into their journey when Corporal Ashworth discovered distinctive hoofprints near a stream crossing. The marks were fresh, no more than a day old, and showed signs that the rider had stopped to water their horse. More importantly, there were 2 sets of prints. Princess Ilara had not been traveling alone, though whether her companion was friend or foe remained unclear. As they followed the trail deeper into the woods, Thornfield's thoughts returned to the ransom letter. Something about it continued to bother him, beyond the obvious implications for the kingdom's security. The demands were almost too convenient, targeting exactly the resources that Shadowmere had been seeking through diplomatic channels. It suggested either remarkable intelligence gathering or inside knowledge of the ongoing negotiations. Back at the palace, King Aldrich was dealing with his own crisis of leadership. The Royal Council, a collection of nobles and advisors with varying loyalties and motivations, had been in emergency session since the previous evening. Lord Chancellor Edmund Fairfax, a man whose political instincts had kept him in power through 3 different reigns, argued for immediate compliance with the ransom demands to ensure the princess's safety. Opposition came from an unexpected source. Duchess Isabel Greymont had requested permission to address the council directly. Despite her unofficial status, her close relationship with the princess gave her words significant weight. She stood before the assembled nobles in a simple blue gown, her silver hair pulled back severely, and delivered a speech that would be remembered for years to come. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I have known Princess Ilara since she was a child. She is headstrong, brilliant, and absolutely devoted to this kingdom. The idea that she would allow herself to be used as a tool to extort concessions from her father is unthinkable. If she is truly being held against her will, then we must rescue her. If she has chosen to disappear, then we must understand why." The Duchess revealed additional details that she had withheld during her initial questioning. Princess Ilara had been conducting research into the family histories of several noble houses, including some with ties to Shadowmere. She had also been asking pointed questions about the terms of her arranged marriage and the specific territorial concessions that were part of the agreement. Most troubling of all, she had expressed concerns about the loyalty of certain members of the royal court. Meanwhile, the search party had discovered evidence of a larger group moving through the forest. The tracks suggested at least 6 mounted riders, all moving with the discipline and coordination of military personnel. Thornfield's concerns about a Shadowmere incursion appeared to be well-founded, but the presence of Princess Ilara's tracks alongside the others raised disturbing questions about the nature of her involvement. Lieutenant Blackwood, scouting ahead of the main group, returned with news of abandoned campsite roughly 2 miles deeper into the woods. The site showed signs of recent use, with the ashes of a cooking fire still warm to the touch. More importantly, she had found a piece of fabric caught on a low branch, silk of a quality that could only have come from royal garments. As they approached the campsite, Thornfield ordered his men to spread out and approach cautiously. The clearing was small, surrounded by dense undergrowth that could easily conceal an ambush. The remains of the fire were carefully arranged, suggesting either experienced woodsmen or military personnel. Personal items were notably absent, indicating that whoever had used the site was careful not to leave evidence of their identity. Corporal Ashworth made the most significant discovery hidden beneath a pile of leaves at the edge of the clearing. A leather saddlebag, bearing the royal crest, contained several items that painted a complex picture of the princess's situation. There was a detailed map of the borderlands, with certain locations marked in her handwriting, a small pouch of gold coins, and most puzzling of all, a letter in the princess's own hand, addressed to someone identified only as a faithful friend. The letter, written in Princess Ilara's distinctive script, spoke of her determination to uncover a plot against the kingdom and her willingness to sacrifice her own safety to protect her people. She wrote of false friends within the palace walls and her growing conviction that the arranged marriage was part of a larger scheme to weaken Ethermore's position. The letter ended with a promise to return with evidence that would expose the true threat to the realm. This discovery changed everything Thornfield thought he knew about the situation. If the princess was indeed conducting her own investigation into threats against the kingdom, then her disappearance might be voluntary. However, that did not eliminate the danger she faced from hostile forces in the borderlands, nor did it resolve the political crisis her absence was creating at home. The search party pressed on, following increasingly faint tracks toward the border regions where Shadowmere patrols were known to operate. The landscape gradually changed from dense forest to rolling hills dotted with ancient stone watchtowers that had once marked the frontier between kingdoms. Many of these structures had been abandoned for decades, making them perfect hideouts for anyone seeking to avoid detection. As afternoon faded into evening, the team made camp in a defensible position with clear sight lines in all directions. Thornfield assigned watch rotations and reviewed their options for the following day. They were now in contested territory, where they might encounter Shadowmere forces at any moment. The diplomatic immunity that protected them within Ethermore's borders would mean nothing if they were discovered conducting an unauthorized military operation in neutral lands. Sergeant Redstone, warming his hands over a small fire, voiced what many of the men were thinking. "Captain, if the princess is working with Shadowmere forces, willingly or not, we could be walking into a trap. These border regions are perfect for an ambush, and we don't know how many enemies we might be facing." The Thornfield nodded grimly, understanding the risks they all faced. "That's a chance we have to take, Sergeant. Our duty is to the crown, and that means bringing the princess home safely, regardless of the circumstances that led to her disappearance. We continue at first light. But as the stars appeared overhead and the men settled into their bedrolls, Thornfield found himself unable to sleep. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a disturbing picture, one that suggested the threat to the kingdom might be far greater than a simple kidnapping or diplomatic crisis. Princess Ilara's investigation had apparently uncovered something significant enough to risk her life and her crown to expose. The question that haunted him as he stared into the dying embers of their campfire was whether they would find the princess in time to prevent whatever catastrophe she had discovered, or whether they would arrive too late to save either her or the kingdom she was trying to protect. The morning would bring answers, but also greater dangers than any of them could imagine. The third day of the search began with an ominous discovery that changed everything. Captain Thornfield thought he knew about the situation. Corporal Ashworth, while scouting the perimeter of their camp, found fresh horse tracks that appeared to circle their position during the night. Someone had been watching them, close enough to count their numbers and assess their capabilities, yet skilled enough to avoid detection by experienced soldiers on watch duty. More disturbing still was the realization that the tracks belonged to unshod horses, a practice common among Shadowmere cavalry units who prized stealth over the protection that iron shoes provided. This suggested that the search party was now being actively tracked by enemy forces, turning hunters into hunted in the span of a few hours. Thornfield gathered his men and made a difficult decision that would test their training and loyalty. Rather than retreat to safer territory, they would continue deeper into the borderlands, but with new tactics designed to flush out their pursuers. The plan was risky and depended on drawing the enemy into an engagement on terms favorable to Ethermore forces. Lieutenant Blackwood was given command of a smaller group tasked with creating a false trail leading south toward the old mining settlements. Meanwhile, Thornfield would lead the main force north toward the ruins of Greyhold Keep, an ancient fortress that had changed hands between kingdoms multiple times over the centuries. Intelligence suggested that if Princess Ilara was being held anywhere in the region, the abandoned keep would be the most logical choice. As they approached the ruins, the landscape became increasingly desolate. Greyhold Keep perched on a rocky outcrop like a stone sentinel, its broken towers and crumbling walls testimony to the violent history of the borderlands. The keep had been built during the reign of King Aldric's grandfather and had served as a crucial strategic point until political changes made its maintenance too expensive to justify. The approach to the keep was treacherous, with only a single winding path that switched back up the rocky slope. It was perfect defensive terrain for anyone holding the fortress, but it also meant that any force inside would have limited escape routes if the situation turned against them. Thornfield studied the ancient walls through his spyglass, looking for signs of recent habitation or defensive preparations. What he saw made his blood run cold. Smoke was rising from one of the inner courtyards, indicating that the keep was indeed occupied. More ominously, he could make out figures moving along the battlements in patterns that suggested organized military discipline rather than random bandit activity. Someone had turned Greyhold Keep into a functioning military outpost, and they were prepared for visitors. Back at Valenhall Palace, the political situation had deteriorated rapidly. The deadline specified in the ransom letter was approaching, and King Aldric faced pressure from multiple directions. Foreign ambassadors demanded explanations for the delay in the engagement announcement, while his own nobles argued bitterly about how to respond to the crisis. Some called for military action, others for diplomatic negotiations, and a few even suggested that the princess's fate was less important than maintaining the kingdom's strategic position. Duchess Isabel had spent the morning in Princess Ilara's private chambers, searching for any additional clues that might shed light on her investigation. What she found hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace surpassed her worst fears. The princess had compiled detailed evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the royal court, complete with names, dates, and documentation of treasonous correspondence. The evidence revealed that several prominent nobles, including some members of the royal council, had been in secret communication with Queen Morwen of Shadowmere for months before the marriage negotiations began. The arranged engagement was not a diplomatic solution to border tensions, but rather a carefully orchestrated plan to place a Shadowmere sympathizer in line for the Ethermore throne. Princess Ilara's future husband, Prince Roderick Blackthorn, was Queen Morwen's nephew and heir to significant territorial claims that would effectively merge portions of both kingdoms under Shadowmere control. Armed with this explosive information, Duchess Isabel demanded an immediate audience with King Aldrich. The revelation that his daughter had uncovered a plot of such magnitude explained both her desperate flight from the palace and the sophisticated nature of the forces arrayed against her. The conspiracy was far more dangerous than a simple kidnapping. It threatened the very existence of Ethermore as an independent kingdom. Meanwhile, Captain Thornfield and his men had positioned themselves in the ruins of an old watchtower that provided both cover and a clear view of Greyhold Keep's main gate. Sergeant Redstone, using skills learned in decades of border warfare, had identified at least 12 defenders visible on the walls, but the actual garrison size remained unknown. The defenders appeared to be professional soldiers rather than bandits, confirming Thornfield's suspicions about Shadowmere involvement. The waiting was broken by the sound of horses approaching from the north. A small group of riders emerged from behind the keep, moving with the urgency of messengers carrying important dispatches. Through his spyglass, Thornfield was able to identify the lead rider as wearing the distinctive black and silver livery of Queen Morwen's personal guard. The confirmation that Shadowmere forces were operating this deep in neutral territory constituted an act of war, but it also provided crucial intelligence about the nature of the threat they faced. As the afternoon wore on, Thornfield observed increased activity within the keep. Additional guards appeared on the walls, and what appeared to be preparation for departure was taking place in the courtyard. Someone inside had received new orders, and the timeline for whatever operation they were conducting had apparently been accelerated. The captain realized that time was running out not just for Princess Alara, but potentially for the entire kingdom. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Corporal Ashworth, while monitoring the keep's water supply, discovered a hidden entrance that had been carved into the rock face during the fortress's original construction. The passage was narrow and treacherous, but it appeared to lead directly into the lower levels of the keep, where prisoners would most likely be held. It was exactly the kind of secret entrance that Princess Alara's historical research would have revealed. The plan that emerged from their tactical discussion was audacious and extremely dangerous. A small infiltration team would use the hidden passage to locate and extract the princess, while the remaining force created a diversion at the main gate. Success would depend on precise timing and the ability of a few men to overcome what could be a significantly larger enemy force. Failure would likely result in the death of the rescue team and leave the princess at the mercy of her captors. As darkness fell over the borderlands, Thornfield made final preparations for the mission that would either save Princess Alara and expose the conspiracy threatening the kingdom, or result in a diplomatic incident that could trigger open warfare between Ethermore and Shadowmere. The stakes could not be higher, and every decision from this point forward would have consequences that reached far beyond the ancient walls of Greyhold Keep. Sergeant Redstone volunteered to lead the infiltration team, despite his age and the obvious dangers involved.
"I've been protecting the royal family for 25 years, Captain," he said quietly as he checked his weapons one final time. "I'm not about to stop now, regardless of what we might find in there." The assault would begin at midnight, when the defenders' attention would be at its lowest ebb.
Until then, the soldiers of Ethermo waited in the shadows of the ruins, knowing that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of their princess, but the future of their kingdom itself. The conspiracy that Princess Alara had discovered was about to be put to its ultimate test, and the outcome would reshape the political landscape of the entire region. In the keep above, Princess Alara sat in a cold stone cell, unaware that rescue was approaching, but still determined to complete the mission that had brought her to this dangerous place. She had the evidence needed to expose the traitors in her father's court, but first she had to survive long enough to deliver it. The game of kingdoms and crowns was entering its final phase, and the princess was no longer content to be merely a playing piece in someone else's strategy. The midnight assault on Greyhold Keep began with the precision of a military operation that had been rehearsed countless times, though never under such desperate circumstances. Sergeant Redstone led Corporals Ashworth and Mills through the treacherous hidden passage, while Captain Thornfield coordinated the diversionary attack from his position near the main gate. The sound of steel against stone echoed softly through the narrow tunnel as they navigated obstacles that had been placed there centuries earlier. The passage emerged into what had once been the keep's wine cellar, now empty except for broken barrels and the musty smell of decay. Above them, the sound of boots on stone indicated that guards were moving through the upper levels, according to their patrol schedules.
Redstone held up his hand for silence as voices drifted down from the floor above, speaking in the harsh dialect of Shadowmere's mountain provinces. Princess Elara was indeed being held in the keep, but not as the helpless captive that everyone had assumed. The truth, when Redstone's team finally located her cell, proved to be far more complex and dangerous than any of them had imagined. The princess sat calmly on a stone bench, fully dressed and apparently unharmed, but her eyes held an intensity that spoke of someone who had seen too much and understood the full implications of what she had discovered. "Sergeant Redstone," she whispered, as he picked the lock on her cell door. "You should not have come. This place is not what it appears to be, and the people holding me are not the real enemy we face." Her words sent a chill through the rescue team, but there was no time for detailed explanations. The diversion at the main gate had begun, with Lieutenant Blackwood's archers sending flaming arrows over the walls to create the impression of a much larger attacking force. The keep's defenders responded exactly as anticipated, rushing to reinforce the main defenses while leaving the interior more lightly guarded. As they moved through the lower levels of the keep, Princess Elara revealed the shocking truth about her situation. She had not been kidnapped at all, but had voluntarily placed herself in apparent captivity to gather intelligence on the conspiracy she had uncovered. The Shadowmere soldiers holding her were not loyal to Queen Morwen, but were part of a resistance movement within that kingdom that opposed the planned annexation of Ethermore. Captain Victor Stormwind, the leader of the Shadowmere garrison at Greyhold Keep, was actually working to prevent the war that both kingdoms' nobles seemed determined to provoke. He had been secretly feeding information to Princess Elara about the true extent of the conspiracy, which involved not just political marriage, but systematic infiltration of Ethermore's military and administrative structures by Shadowmere agents. The princess had discovered that her arranged marriage to Prince Roderick was merely the final step in a plan that had been developing for years. Queen Morwen had been placing loyal operatives in key positions throughout Ethermore's government, creating a network that would allow her to effectively control the kingdom without the costly invasion that open warfare would require. The mountain passes that the ransom letter demanded were crucial to this strategy, as they would provide Shadowmere with the ability to move troops and supplies into Ethermore whenever political pressure needed military backing. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As they reached the keep's main hall, Princess Elara directed Sergeant Redstone to a hidden compartment behind the ancient tapestries that decorated the walls. Inside was a collection of documents that would shake the foundations of both kingdoms. Correspondence, proving that King Aldrich himself was not the target of the conspiracy, but rather one of its unwitting architects. The letters revealed that several of the king's most trusted advisors, including Lord Chancellor Fairfax and Duke Magnus Ironhold, had been manipulating royal policy for months to create the conditions that would make Shadowmere's infiltration strategy successful. They had deliberately escalated border tensions, suggested the political marriage as a solution, and even helped arrange for Princess Elara's kidnapping, to pressure the king into accepting terms that would effectively surrender Aethermore's independence. Captain Stormwind appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grim but relieved to see that the rescue operation was proceeding according to the plan he had secretly coordinated with Princess Elara. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "my scouts report that Queen Morwen's main force is less than a day's march from here. If we're going to expose this conspiracy and prevent a war, we must move tonight." The plan that emerged from their hurried conference was audacious beyond anything that Captain Thornfield could have imagined when he set out to rescue what he thought was a kidnapped princess. Princess Elara would return to Valenhall Palace with evidence of the conspiracy, but she would be accompanied by Captain Stormwind and a delegation of Shadowmere resistance leaders who could testify to Queen Morwen's unauthorized actions and their own kingdom's opposition to the annexation plan. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Blackwood's diversionary attack had proven more successful than intended. The defenders of Greyhold Keep, believing they were under assault by a significant Ethermore force, had sent urgent messages to Queen Morwen's advancing army requesting immediate reinforcement. This would bring the enemy forces into the open,
where they could be confronted by the combined armies of both kingdoms' legitimate governments. The escape from Greyhold Keep required careful coordination between multiple groups moving through dangerous terrain in complete darkness. Princess Elara insisted on carrying the most incriminating documents herself, refusing to entrust such vital evidence to anyone else despite the obvious risks.
Captain Stormwind's men provided escort and local knowledge, while Thornfield's guards maintained rear security against pursuit. As dawn broke over the borderlands, the unlikely alliance of Aethermore guards and Shadowmere resistance fighters had successfully evacuated the keep and were moving rapidly toward friendly territory.
Behind them, smoke rose from the ancient fortress as the remaining Shadowmere loyalists realized that their carefully laid plans had been completely compromised. The journey back to Valenhall Palace proved to be a race against time as much as a tactical withdrawal. Queen Morwen's forces, realizing that their operation had been exposed, were now moving to complete their invasion before the conspiracy could be fully revealed. The political marriage that was supposed to provide legal justification for Shadowmere's occupation was no longer possible, leaving military conquest as the only remaining option for achieving their territorial ambitions. Princess Elara, riding alongside Captain Stormwind, used the long hours in the saddle to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy and plan their strategy for exposing it. The evidence they carried would prove that several prominent nobles in both kingdoms had been working together to create a crisis that would benefit only themselves, regardless of the cost to their people. But as they approached the borders of Aethermore proper, scouts brought disturbing news. Lord Chancellor Fairfax had declared Princess Elara dead and was moving to implement emergency powers that would effectively place him in control of the kingdom until the crisis could be resolved. King Aldrich, grief-stricken by his daughter's apparent death, had been sedated by the royal physician and was unable to exercise his authority. The conspiracy was entering its final phase, and the conspirators were no longer concerned with maintaining their cover. Princess Elara and her allies would have to move quickly and decisively to prevent the complete takeover of Aethermore by forces that served interests other than those of its people. As Valenhall Palace came into view across the morning mists, Captain Thornfield realized that their mission was far from over. Rescuing the princess had been the easy part. Now they would have to save an entire kingdom from enemies who had been operating from within its walls for months, if not years. The real battle for Aethermore's future was about to begin, and success would require more than military skill. It would demand the kind of courage that could only come from absolute commitment to justice and truth. The final confrontation began not with swords and shields, but with words and documents that would prove more powerful than any weapon ever forged. Princess Elara's return to Valenhall Palace created an immediate crisis for the conspirators, who had already begun implementing their plans for seizing control of the kingdom. Lord Chancellor Fairfax, caught completely off guard by the princess's sudden appearance in the throne room, struggled to maintain his composure as his carefully constructed narrative collapsed around him. King Aldrich's recovery from his medicated stupor was swift and decisive once he realized the extent to which he had been manipulated by his own advisors. The grief that had nearly broken him transformed into righteous fury as Princess Elara presented the evidence she had gathered during her dangerous mission to the borderlands. The documents clearly showed how his most trusted counselors had been systematically betraying the kingdom while pretending to serve its interests. The throne room of Valenhall Palace became an impromptu court of justice as Captain Stormwind and his Shadowmere resistance fighters testified to Queen Morwen's unauthorized invasion plans and the network of corruption that extended across both kingdoms. Duke Magnus Ironhold, realizing that his treachery had been completely exposed, made a desperate attempt to flee the palace but was apprehended by Captain Thornfield's guards before he could reach the stables. Duchess Isabel Greymont, who had spent anxious days searching for clues to the princess's whereabouts, proved instrumental in connecting the various pieces of evidence into a coherent picture of the conspiracy. Her intimate knowledge of court politics and noble family histories allowed her to identify connections that had been carefully hidden for months. The web of treachery reached deeper than anyone had suspected, involving not just high-ranking nobles but also several foreign merchants who had been facilitating communication between the conspirators. The military situation remained critical despite the political revelations unfolding within the palace. Queen Morwen's invasion force was still approaching the border, and her commanders might not be aware that their carefully planned infiltration had been discovered. Captain Thornfield found himself coordinating defensive preparations while simultaneously ensuring that the evidence of the conspiracy was properly preserved for future legal proceedings. Princess Elara insisted on personally leading the effort to expose any remaining traitors within the palace guard and administrative staff. Her weeks of investigation had given her insights into the methods that Shadowmere agents used to identify and recruit collaborators, and she was determined to ensure that no enemy operatives remained in positions where they could threaten the kingdom's security. The process was delicate, requiring careful verification of loyalties without creating a climate of paranoia that could harm innocent people. The arrival of additional Shadowmere resistance fighters throughout the morning provided crucial intelligence about Queen Morwen's military preparations and political situation within her own kingdom. Captain Stormwind revealed that the invasion plan had never been popular with Shadowmere's military leadership or common people, who had no desire for a costly war that would benefit only the Queen's immediate circle of supporters. The resistance movement had been growing for months, waiting for an opportunity to challenge her authority. As noon approached, messengers arrived with reports that Queen Morwen's advance forces had crossed the border and were demanding passage through Ethermore territory to reach the neutral zone around Greyhold Keep. The Queen apparently still believed that her conspiracy was intact and that the intimidation tactics that had worked in the past would continue to be effective. Her miscalculation would prove to be the final mistake in a plan that had been flawed from its inception. King Aldrich, his authority fully restored and his understanding of the situation complete, made a series of decisive moves that demonstrated why he had successfully ruled Ethermore for 2 decades. Rather than simply repelling the invasion, he sent emissaries to Queen Morwen offering to negotiate a peaceful resolution that would address the legitimate concerns of both kingdoms, while exposing and punishing those who had attempted to profit from artificial conflict. The negotiations that followed were unlike any in the history of either kingdom. Princess Elara and Captain Stormwind worked together to present evidence of the conspiracy to representatives from both sides, demonstrating how nobles from both courts had been manipulating their respective rulers into policies that served only their own interests. The revelation that the entire crisis had been artificially created by a small group of traitors fundamentally changed the nature of the diplomatic discussions. Queen Morwen, faced with irrefutable evidence of her advisor's treachery and growing opposition within her own military, found herself in an impossible position. The invasion force that was supposed to secure her political objectives had become a liability that threatened to trigger a rebellion within Shadowmere itself. The resistance movement, led by Captain Stormwind, represented legitimate grievances that she could no longer ignore without risking civil war in her own kingdom. The solution that emerged from 3 days of intensive negotiations surprised everyone involved. Rather than simply ending the immediate crisis, the talks produced a comprehensive restructuring of relations between the kingdoms that would prevent future conflicts of the same type. Trade agreements were renegotiated to provide fair benefits to both sides. Border disputes were resolved through neutral arbitration. And most importantly, new protocols were established for detecting and preventing the kind of infiltration that had nearly led to war. Lord Chancellor Fairfax and his co-conspirators faced trial before a joint tribunal composed of judges from both kingdoms, ensuring that justice would be seen to be completely impartial. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and their convictions sent a clear message that such betrayals would never be tolerated, regardless of the social rank or political connections of those involved. Duke Magnus Ironhold's attempt to claim diplomatic immunity was rejected when it was proven that he had been acting as an agent of a foreign power rather than a loyal subject of Ethermore. Princess Elara's role in exposing the conspiracy earned her recognition throughout both kingdoms as a leader who placed duty to her people above personal safety or comfort. The arranged marriage that had been central to the original plot was formally cancelled, freeing her to choose her own path in life while maintaining the improved relations between Ethermore and Shadowmere that had emerged from the crisis. Captain Thornfield received formal commendation for his handling of the search and rescue operation, but he took greatest satisfaction from the knowledge that his decision to trust Princess Elara's judgment had helped prevent a devastating war. The loyalty and courage displayed by his men during the mission to Greyhold Keep became the stuff of legend, inspiring a new generation of guards who understood that protecting the kingdom sometimes required questioning orders and thinking beyond traditional military doctrine. The alliance between Captain Stormwind and the Athermo Resistance proved to be the foundation for ongoing cooperation between the kingdoms in areas of mutual interest. Intelligence sharing prevented several subsequent attempts at political manipulation by outside forces, and joint training exercises improved the defensive capabilities of both militaries while building personal relationships that made future conflicts less likely. As autumn arrived and the immediate crisis passed into history, Princess Elara took on new responsibilities that reflected her proven ability to navigate complex political situations. Her investigation skills and understanding of international intrigue made her invaluable in detecting and preventing the kind of gradual infiltration that had nearly destroyed the kingdom. She established a new intelligence service that operated with unprecedented transparency and accountability, ensuring that never again would traitors be able to manipulate the kingdom from within. The story of the Royal Guard's dilemma became a lesson taught in military academies and diplomatic schools throughout the region, demonstrating how loyalty, courage, and clear thinking could overcome even the most sophisticated conspiracy. Captain Thornfield often reflected on how close they had come to disaster and how many lives had been saved by Princess Elara's willingness to risk everything to protect her people. A Greyhold keep was eventually restored and converted into a symbol of cooperation between the kingdoms, housing a joint training facility where guards and soldiers from both Athemor and Shadowmere learned to work together in defense of peace and justice. The ancient fortress that had witnessed so much conflict finally found its purpose as a guardian of friendship rather than a weapon of war. The bonds forged during those dangerous days in the borderlands endured long after the immediate crisis had passed, creating a network of relationships that would help maintain peace and prosperity for generations to come. Princess Elara had proven that true leadership required not just the courage to face danger, but the wisdom to understand when the greatest threats came from within, rather than from obvious enemies across distant borders.